Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The board has been in closed session meeting this evening beginning at 5:10 for the purpose of employment of employee. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Conroy? Here. Mrs. Droney?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Kalquist?
Here.
Mrs. Ostajic?
Present.
Ms. Hirsch?
Here.
Mrs. Davy?
Present.
7 board members present, none are absent. We have no one who has signed up this evening for public comment, so we're going to move along to our workshop discussion for the evening, which is the fiscal year 2011 budget. Dr. Krizik?
It seems like we've been talking about the budget since January, and we've devoted a great deal of time this year discussing our finances. But specifically as it relates to the FY11 budget development process, a couple things. Some of the decisions that were made last March have a direct impact on the FY11 budget. But Ms. Masterton has used at least 3 prior meetings to begin sharing information, tentative information. On May 25th, she gave you the tentative budget review for the revenue portion of the budget. On June 15th, she provided you with the tentative expenditure budget review for the 2010-2011 budget. We used the July 20th meeting to give you the unaudited budget update for FY10 because of the interplay between the FY10 and FY11 budgets. Tonight, there is obviously a workshop meeting. We'll be making a presentation and the opportunity for a great deal of dialogue amongst you and members of the audience. We arranged today to also have this meeting videotaped, as we think it's a critical, important discussion. Our practice has generally been to videotape regular scheduled meetings, and we make decisions on special meetings as necessary. Because our fiscal health and stability is so important to us and then therefore to our community, we felt it was important to make this videotaped. All of the documents that have been created around the budget are also posted on the district's website, so they're easily accessible. But after today, there are 3 more opportunities for continued discussion around the FY11 budget. The August 17th board meeting. Our August 30th meeting is primarily devoted to policy, so I'm not noting that as one. Our September 14th board meeting, which continues also to be a traditional workshop meeting if we needed to continue to have workshop discussions around this budget. And then the last and final meeting around the budget is September 28th, at which time you have to approve the tentative budget as it has to be filed by the last day in September. So you will see an action item on the August 17th budget to approve putting on display the tentative budget for 30 days. And then you will then act on that budget on September 28th. So I know Ms. Masterton has outlined this process for you in the past. I thought it was important to kind of just reaffirm what that process is, but also the fact that we have beyond today at least 3 other opportunities to have discussion around the FY11 budget. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Ms. Masterton. And as she is walking up there, what I would like to say is there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into putting this budget together. It is significant hours that are not always done at the office, but on the evenings and on the weekends. And it also requires the participation of many. She doesn't create the budget in a vacuum. She relies on individuals to submit information to her. And she's also looking to put in a system of checks and balances. So if something doesn't, if something is not just right, there has to be significant follow-up. So it looks like she makes it appear seamless and easy, but it is far from simple and easy. So having said that, Ms. Masterton.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. Put that up just a little bit. So there we go. Okay, as Dr. Krizik said, we're going to do a preliminary budget review, and really all it is a review of all the things that we've been talking about for quite a long time, and the tweaking that goes along with getting our final numbers in and working off of those final numbers as well for the budget process. So let's start off again with our 9/10 fiscal activity that we reviewed last month. Seems like just yesterday, but it was last month. And the 2009-10 beginning fund balance obviously is the 2008-9 ending fund balance. Education fund started with $15,906,042. Operations and maintenance, almost $5 million. Debt service had $1.4 million. Transportation, $470,000. IMRF and Social Security was $532,000. We had almost $10 million in capital projects. Working cash a little over $4.3 million, and life safety $1.4 million, for a total of $38,819,163 as our total fund balance. I'm not going to read all of the numbers in there, but altogether with our revenue, we received $106,998, 68 and 76 cents. And then our expenditures, $114,239,379.78. The largest variance in between revenue and expenditure, of course, falls into capital projects. The money was received in 08-09 for those capital projects and for, prior years as well. And that's the money that we kind of salt away for additional projects. And in this case, the money from 08-09, 07, 08, and 06-07, I believe, all were sitting in the fund to be used for the various projects that we had. So although we only had $14,000 worth of revenue in capital projects, we spent just a little over $7 million in there. And so that would account for that rather large variance between revenue and expenditure. So we ended up with an ending fund balance of $31,577,852. And here again, you're going to see the changes in the fund balances. In the education fund, we actually decreased by $107,000. In operations and maintenance, we increased by $482,000. Debt service had an increase of $322,000. Transportation had a major decrease of $455,516. And as we talked about, that's directly traceable back to the lack of funding from the state for transportation this year. IMRF and Social Security was down a little over $124,000. That was actually a deliberate decision that we made to lower our fund balance in IMRF, Social Security, and put a little bit more money in education. So that was exactly really what we wanted to be doing. Again, the capital projects, we we dropped $7,034,630. And life safety, we dropped $365,682.81. And working cash, we did a slight levy, not as much as we had thought we were going to do because of the economy, but we did have levy and interest in the amount of $40,973.72 as an increase. So altogether, our fund balances decreased by $7,241,311, and our operating funds actually decreased by $163,756.49. So as we talked about, our ending, and these are unaudited figures, but our ending figures for 9-10 become our beginning figures for 10-11. I'm jumping already to 11-12, 10-11. So let's now talk about the revenue that we've projected. In the education fund for 10-11, we're looking at almost $82 million, about $9.4 million in operations. Debt service will be $10,206,201. Transportation, almost $2.8 million. IMRF is $2.8, almost $2.9 million. Capital projects is interest only of about $15,000. Working cash interest only of about $24,954. And life safety, again, interest only of $3,000. Altogether, revenue is projected to be $107,262,025. Here's our breakdown of revenue. And as you can see, the largest amount with 76.37% is the education fund. Goes straight for instruction and education. Operations accounts for another 8.8%. Our debt service is about 9.5%, and then the rest of the funds account for the remainder of our revenue. Here is our 2010-11 budget comparison to expenditures in 2009-10. I show the 2009-10 budget as well as the 2009-10 unaudited expenditure amounts, and then our 10-11 budget. And as you can see, in the education fund, we spent $82,522,081, and we are actually decreasing our expenditures this year to $81,995,602. That's a direct result from the reductions that we have made over the past year with the guidance of the Board of Education. Our operations and maintenance fund dropped about 0.92%. Increased about 0.92%. We spent $9,362,079, and we're expecting to increase to $9,448,597. Transportation. We're expecting to go up about 5%. $2,632,556 is what we spent, and our budget is $2,767,945. And in IMRF, we're expecting to go up about 2.5%. We spent $2,756,717, and we expect to go up to $2,825,631. So altogether, we're looking at a 0.24% decrease in our operating funds, dropping down to $97,037,675. That's actually a 0.58% increase from our budget from 9-10, but it is a 0.24% decrease from our actual expenditures. Debt service is increasing to about 4% to almost $10 million. Fire prevention and safety, we're not expecting any expenditures at all, so that's a 100% reduction. And capital projects has gone down from $7 million to $792,000, so that is a reduction of 88.76%. Altogether, on all the funds, we expect to drop about 5.68% to $107,747,182 from $114 million plus. When we talk about expenditures, we like to talk about them in several different ways, but one of the biggest ones is by the object number, by what we're paying for. The object is what, and in this case, the what includes salaries, which is our largest cost item at 60% of our total budget, benefits, which accounts for 12% of our total budget, and that's not just the operating fund, that's the entire budget. Purchase services is about 10%, 5% for supplies, and the remaining 13% is laid out for capital outlay, dues and fees, which includes transfers and tuition, and non-capitalized equipment. And just to show you the numbers for that graph, this is expenditures by object for all the funds. So we expect to spend $64,469,698 in salaries, benefits of $12,400,000, purchase services at $10,329,000, supplies at $5,565,000. That includes books as well, textbooks. Capital outlay, we've drastically reduced capital outlay, and this is capitalized equipment of over $20,000. That's $395,000. Dues, fees, and tuition at $13,124,871, and non-capitalized equipment which is anything from $500 to $2,000, $1,463,651, for a total of $107,747,182. The second way that we look at expenditures is by the why, the program. What's it for? Why are we doing it? And in this case, the regular program, regular instruction, accounts for the majority of the fund expenditures at $41 million. Special programs include all the special education programs for the most part, and that's almost $12 million. Vocational programs count for $1,751,000. Interscholastic sports is for all the schools is $1,233,000. Summer school and gifted has come in at $1 million. Bilingual will be at $1.1 million, a little over that. And tuition's at $1,080,000. Pupil services will be $5,565,481. And instructional services, which include libraries and media services, is $4,826,544. General administration from the superintendent's office and the Board of Education is $944,988. That includes all of our property, casualty, workers' compensation, et cetera, all of those insurances that go along with it. That's the majority of it. Also our legal fees, et cetera. School administration, which is basically the principal's accounts and the secretaries in the office, are almost $5 million. And our support services, which include the business office, the finance office, operations and maintenance, transportation, all of the IMRF, or a large part of the IMRF costs in there, and capital projects for O&M are $16,419,754. And then just general services are at $1.5 million. Other support services at $1 million. And payments to other LEAs is a little over $917,000. That's basically our SACID costs. And our debt services, again, are $9.9 million. We have $50,000 in provision for contingencies. That's just a what if. Would love that to be bigger just in case, but we'll do with what we have. And then under our 8,000, which is a basically new program account, is $2,004,616. Those are our transfers into the debt service fund for our long-term leases. Now, so our total budget, because this is so interesting and exciting. Our estimated ending fund balances are really the important thing here. When we talk about the differences between budgeted revenue and budgeted appropriations, what you see is that the education fund will dip into it a little bit more by $78,000 and hope to end at $15,720,457. We also will spend a little more in operations and maintenance by about $6,000. And we'll hope to end at $5,169,450. Transportation, we'll spend a little less and try to rebuild that fund balance slightly by $1,574, and so our estimated fund balance at the end would be $16,668. It's pretty small. Working cash, obviously, we're not having any expenditures. We're only looking at revenue of about $24,954, ending at $4,436,272. And IMRF, we expect to build a little bit back up again at $57,804 for an estimated ending fund balance of $465,292. For our total operating funds, we expect to have $149 to the good, and that's been kind of the running joke in the office is whenever somebody says, do we have any money for this? I say, I have $149. That's what I have, is $149. And so that kind of shuts everyone up really quickly. So our estimated ending fund balance of the operating funds is $25,808,139. Again, capital projects. Our capital budget, the difference between revenue and expenditure is spending $777,000 of our fund balance. Debt service, we actually expect to be to the good of $288,694. And fire, life, and safety, again, the $3,000. So we have a variance of a negative $485,306. So we expect our other funds to drop to $5,284,554. Altogether, we're looking at a decrease in fund balance of $485,157 to $31,092,693. That's approximately 26.6% of expenditures. Dr. Krizik alluded to, doesn't want to move, there we go, to our next steps. So what we need to do is finalize and close 2009-10, which we're in the middle of this week. Our auditors are here, expect to be gone by Thursday, and everything's going very well with the audits. We're pleased about that. We will incorporate any new revenue and expenditure changes into the 2010-11 budget as we move forward. We presented a tentative legal budget to the board, and that's actually our August meeting. We're bringing the tentative budget to the board at our August board meeting and asking to be put on display for 30 days. And then we need to adopt the budget no later than September 28th business meeting. Next two slides are probably very familiar to you. These are the PMA slides of our projections. What's important here to see is that, as we look at our fund balances, we're looking at the ending this year with about 3.2 months worth of expenditures, which is really, about 25%, 26% on there. And we're looking at altogether total revenue has dropped about 1%, and expenditures are increasing about 0.63% in total. It's the next years that we begin to really worry. In fiscal 12, as we talked about, we'll have a deficit of approximately 200, well, actually it's $2.2 million, a little over that, $2.3 million. So 11-12 is when we are really looking at some big problems. And honestly, in 10-11, although our projections look like this and we'll work as hard as we can, we are keeping in mind that we are pushing very close to tax anticipation warrants. And if there is any further loss of funding from the state, that could push us right into tax anticipation warrants at that time. So here's the graphic representation of our high points and our low points. In 2011, our high point will be $25,808,139. In our low point in our operating funds will be $396,752. And unfortunately, by 2012, that will morph into $2.354 million, and that is a significant concern, which obviously warrants the fact that we need to continue to make further reductions as we move along. And I will happy to take any questions about any of the documents that are in board docs as well as the PowerPoint.
Mrs. Davy.
Ms. Masterton, thank you very much for this. This is very bleak but very helpful that you've laid it out for us so that we, I think, see a course of the direction we need to go. I wonder if you could comment on the recent legislation related to the working cash fund and how that may fit into any deliberations we have of what some of our new other options may be.
There had been a legislation, well, there had been some case, actually had been a suit, about the ability to transfer working cash funds from working cash to education and then on for projects or whatever else. So basically what it came down to was the old, do we completely abate, which is what many people felt that working cash was for. We completely abate, or can we make loans, or can we partially abate to the education fund and then transfer from the education fund to whatever fund you're allowable by law to transfer to, which generally is operations and maintenance or transportation. and do your expenditures out of that. And there had been a rather large suit going on about the ability to do that. What came forward from the legislation is that from the past and from forward, those transfers are allowable by law, and that you do not have to completely abate the working cash fund. You are allowed to make those transfers in there or partially abate the working cash fund. That is kind of what it's for. So I know it sounds rather strange that, you know, you have what you would consider to be a savings fund that you can't necessarily do too much with without completely, taking all the money and transferring it out. But that was what a lot of people felt, was part of what was going on there. So, go ahead.
An elaboration of that, the working cash fund is part of the operating funds, and so it wouldn't necessarily help us at a cash low point to shift from working cash to any of the funds because it's all part of the operating funds. So in healthier fiscal times, this new legislation or this clarification of the legislation is incredibly helpful to us. But we currently use that to keep us solvent in the operating funds as the year goes on. So it doesn't really serve us, it won't help us avoid tax anticipation warrants. I just want to talk about one thing related to Pat's budget going forward, and that is, this is the last year where we will be receiving ARRA funds. And this year we're expected to have around $950,000. I think we had $918,000. Thank you, Meg. $918,000. And that goes away the following year. So it is further exacerbated as we go forward, because what that has been helping to support will need to find a revenue source to help support some of those positions and or initiatives around professional development, the psychologists, some of the coaches, some of the assistants. Meg's been optimizing ARRA funds with the IDEA grant, so we get the maximum benefit of both of those revenue sources, and has tried to give us the greatest flexibility with making decisions. We, Karen and Meg, have sought to capitalize the ARRA money as much as possible last year and this year to bring in as much professional development as possible to help support and provide some foundational work to the initiatives. We still have a lot of work to do, a lot of professional development work to do, and so the issue will be going forward, how will we continue to support the professional development work to help to support the work of the teachers. So I just kind of want to put that out there, that there's a major revenue source that will go away in after 2011, which leads us to the comments that we had made before, that we would minimally be looking at reducing our FY12 budget by $3 million and potentially by $5 million. So as we go through a different process from last year, but still a process going forward, that's our target, $3 to $5 million of another round of reductions.
Could I just follow up and ask what assumptions you made of state revenues? I know we're closing the year with them owing us $2.6 million that we've pretty much written off, and even if we get it, they'll defer something else, so it becomes a smoke and mirrors game with the state giving us money. So what assumptions are you making for what you think we'll get and what we actually will get for this 11 budget?
I always like to try to be as conservative as I can be with revenue, because I don't like to plan on money that I'm not positive we're going to get. And so what I basically did was, knowing full well that the state owes us $2.6 million, of which we've received a little trickle, probably about $300,000, $400,000 so far. I budgeted as if that $2.6 million wasn't coming to us, only because I think I know full well that the $2.6 million at the end of the year probably won't be coming to us. because the state so far has not been able to provide a revenue source and be able to show us that they have a revenue source that will fund even what they're projecting they're going to be able to give us. And because of that, I'm hard-pressed to put any more money into that on the assumption that they're appropriating this money when they don't have it to appropriate. Even if something should change in terms of a tax increase, an income tax increase, or some other kind of increase in there, the projections that we've heard from the financial analysts is there won't really be a major shift for another year to year and a half, because Illinois has a terrific amount of debt, and they have a lot of payments to make and a lot of other things to do. So, and naturally, you know, everybody starts putting their hand out when a new tax goes in, and they have a lot of bills that they still have to pay to private sources as well as to the public sources. And so what I did was just basically take the appropriations that we were supposed to be getting and left out the $2.6 million that we know that we're not getting. And I was pretty conservative with even the appropriations on there. And I do feel that they're slowly bringing a little bit of money back in, but at the end of the year, again, we'll be in the same circumstance that we are before. I wanted to add also something about the special education, just, you know, as an FYI for future years. The state, actually the federal government has made some changes to the IDEA grant, in that there is a requirement that we have to supply a maintenance of effort, which means that we always have to spend more than the prior year, unless we have a loss of students or a loss of staff that we can document, or we have a change in the IEPs or some other thing. But everything else being equal, it means that we have to spend at least $1 more than we did the prior year. It's called a maintenance of effort. The federal government has gotten very strict with the maintenance of effort rules, and formally what they would allow was for an IEP student, there would be part of regular education and part of special education that was all included in there. So the IDEA was to be for the whole student. Now they will only allow that portion that has to do with the special education part. So things like attendance service, counseling services, regular instruction, regular classroom instruction, the indirect costs that come from principals and, you know, the offices and everything else are no longer included. So at this point we are maintaining our effort, but it will become more and more difficult to do that and try to find any significant change in the special education arena. So while we may be able to make reductions, that will have a corresponding loss in income in the future years, just to tie our hands even more.
Mrs. Deroni.
Thank you, Pat, for a great presentation and all the documents that you gave us. It's good to have it all in one spot. A couple of questions. One thing that can typically blow our budget sky, just do away with it, is enrollment in the fall. You know, the end of August, we start adding sections. We want to keep class sizes low. We have a couple more teachers. We have all these other special education students. Do we have any idea of what those numbers are going to look like? Do we have we noticed, for example, a big influx of private school kids, or any way to try to button that down to know whether or not this budget's going to get us beyond the day we adapt it?
I'm going to first ask you, based on our projected enrollment, how many new positions did you put in the budget for this year? 5. We had several classes on the bubble when we presented our enrollment plan in the spring. And the good news is that we were able to make some adjustments and actually reduce sections, and at least Emerson, because of a significant number of students moving out. So that was a good, that was a save, so to speak. The kindergarten at Hawthorne recently shifted to make sure to go from 3 sections to 4, which was a potential, because kindergarten's always the potential. There was a section at Jefferson in first grade that we now have confirmation. It was the first grade that was on the bubble that is shifting over to another section. And Hawthorne is looking at a third grade, and we've not made the approval to that yet because we're still wanting to verify the numbers. So it is highly likely we're going to use all of these 5, if potentially not 1 or 2 more, again, depending. And as you pointed out, Susan, sometimes things require, there's an IEP implementation that we're not aware of that will change something. But we're heading, again, dangerously close to, fully capturing those 5 positions that we had projected. So, again, we were aware of them. We were just keeping our fingers crossed. But it's not likely that we're going to avoid some of that.
The other part of this is that by not adopting until September 28th, we have the ability to make adjustments to our budget up until that time. And so I think the answer to that is there goes my $149, but we do have the ability to make those adjustments and go from there. And because we have a good enough fund balance at this point, we should be fine in terms of the state and not having further problems with the state. But it just does add to the 2.3, obviously, if we have another $100,000 or $200,000, that brings us down to very close to tax anticipation warrants, and at the same time, it multiplies it twice over. So the $200,000 for 2 years becomes $400,000, and that 2.3 becomes 2.7. along with the loss of revenue from the ARRA. So it's a pretty bleak circumstances, but the good news in all of this, or the solace in all of this, is that we do have decent fund balances. We do have a community that supports the district and did support the district with a rate referendum. If you hadn't had that, we would have had some serious problems here, very, very serious problems. So, we'll hold strong and do what we need to do to, provide you with the information you need to make those difficult decisions in the future.
Could you speak a little bit about the topic? As we know, a couple of months ago, members of the teachers union voted not to lessen their increase. What impact do you see that having on this budget and future years?
Well, the amount that we had requested was about $1 million. And so obviously we would be at $1.3 million right now instead of $300,000 and some $1,000. And then, from there, we would be probably in 2012 in a much stronger financial position. Very close to a balanced budget, very close to within about $500,000. So obviously there'd be much less reductions that have to be made. And it is what it is, I think what we appreciate more than anything else is the fact that we were listened to, that it was considered, and it was a great opportunity to provide information to our staff about our situation, regardless of the outcome. And, as I said, we'll continue to make those hard decisions in the future. So,
Mr. Collins.
Let me first preface my question by saying that the word for the evening does seem to be bleak. And while these projections certainly are bleak, in my opinion, without the wise stewardship of Dr. Krizik and Ms. Masterton, we would be in a far worse situation than we are today. So thank you for your wisdom, your guidance, My question is just, can you review for us the major assumptions that you've made in CPI and tax rates, et cetera, in both revenue and expenses?
For this year or for coming years? If you don't mind my asking.
Do you mind both?
No, I don't mind at all.
Thank you.
Hopefully I still have it here. The revenue expenditures were based on a 2.5% CPI moving forward. And
That's for each subsequent vote.
yes, and the 2.5 would be for the levy coming up. 2.7 obviously we already knew for this coming year. Growth was minimal. In fact, we used about a 0.5% in growth, which was mimicking what we had before. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but hope springs eternal. So, there's got to be a pickup. And I do think we're seeing, a little more activity that, might be able to support that. The state, we actually projected no increases whatsoever over the next 2 to 3 years. And in this case, it was a drop of about 5%. In receipts for the state, and another 10% loss in the federal as well, because we lost the Carol White PEP grant this year. PEP grant this year. Not lost it. We had 3 wonderful years of having it, and then it ended up, going. But that was a significant sum of money. So from there on out, we've left that also flat, because we just really don't know. And I hate to continue to drop and drop and drop, because this is, frankly, the lowest support rate from the state and the federal that I've seen in a very, very, very long time. And I have to assume that there's going to be starting to be an upswing to all of this soon. So in this year, we dropped based on just what we knew we were receiving, which was certainly a big drop. The years after that, we left it flat and hoping that it picks up. We're not sure that we will, but we're hoping that we'll pick up from there. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Carlquist.
Ms. Masterton and Dr. Krizik, thank you very much for the report and the work that you put into getting us to this point. I mean, you've taken the parameters that the board gave to size the envelope and found a way to try to shoehorn, at least for the immediate fiscal year, the priorities inside that envelope. I am also, I would say, content that we have achieved at a minimum the 26.6% reserve status, which is north of 25%, which I think remains a floor, a threshold for us as a district, and something that the board needs to be very careful about going forward, not to encroach on, for the obvious reasons stated about tax anticipation warrants and the added risk that comes with that, the added expense that comes with that, and so forth. So I think that's very much a positive. And I appreciate the humor in the whopping $149, but on the other hand, that underestimates the in excess of or close to $500,000 reduction in the fund reserves from a year-to-year basis. So while there may be $149 in the plan, there is a $500,000 reduction in the reserves, and that slope on the minimum, that negative slope on minimum fund reserves, is, in my opinion, unacceptable going into the future, and something that the board needs to correct. I don't think there can be or should be an expectation or assumption that rate increases in the future will correct this. We've talked this evening about a couple of the major levers or variables: growth, new construction, teachers contract, enrollment, state revenues. And even tax collections, which I think is another wild card that's out there. 2 questions. The first is, for this immediate budget, what are some of the rocks that you can turn over or that you're going to watch very closely? And you've alluded to some already, but to find ways during the course of this fiscal year to try to at an operational level. This is the budget, the plan, but at an operational level to reduce, minimize that fund balance degradation year to year, because that just becomes a bigger hole going forward. That's question one. Question two, longer term, and I know while on one hand you're not thinking a lot about fiscal 2012 because we haven't even yet put on public display and approval of this fiscal budget 2011, we are nonetheless already operating in fiscal 2011. So in some respects, this plan is pretty well baked. As we look towards 2012, and we have some substantial reductions to make, what is your thinking, Dr. Krizik, Ms. Masterton, in terms of the process, the timeline, the board's involvement for tackling what is an even larger shortfall to solve for than what we faced this year?
So why don't I take the first part, and then Dr. Krizik can go on to the second part and describe to you the plan that we have been putting together for making thoughtful decisions about what we need to do. As far as our whopping $380,000 that we're hoping to be able to have as our lowest cash balance for this coming year. When you're in times of stress such as this, then you begin to start looking at where you're spending money and how you're spending money. So obviously we can't do a lot about salaries because they're spread over a 24 period, and we've already moved back our salaries into June, which was a very strategic way of handling a very short time of money loss in there. And the benefits goes along with it, but there are certainly other things that you can look to. As we look at purchases that we're making, as we look at contractual obligations that come forward, and in particular, as you saw in there, there's about about $1.5 million in either capitalized or non-capitalized equipment. What can be done is you can spread that out and work within that budget to say, when do we absolutely have to have this? Can we push this off? And honestly, there are some things that are done when money gets really tight in the month of May, where we just literally say we're not going to pay anything, but we absolutely have to pay, and people are going to have to wait an extra 10 days until we get our taxes in June. So there are many things that you do. When we're talking about large purchases such as paper or different kinds of supplies, we ask our staff to only order what is needed on a month-to-month basis. And actually, our vendors are very cooperative with that. The just-in-time theory works very well. We can usually get our paper in within one day. We can get our supplies in within one day. They don't charge us for shipping, so bringing that in reduces waste, makes people more cognizant of the fact that they need to be careful with that. We're also on our copiers, because we did go significantly over on our copiers, we're offering the option to our principals to put in counters with passcodes for each of the employees. It's not a big brother for us because we won't monitor it, because each of the principals have a budget for the number of quote-unquote clicks from the copiers and printers. So they know how much they're allowed to have, and so they can monitor that, and they can work with their staff to minimize their usage of that without our oversight on that, because it's built into their budget. So that's a new thing that we're adding in there too. It also minimizes, it's kind of funny, but no one actually realized that we probably spend $1 million in copies a year. And people do come in and they do their dissertations, and they do their kids' papers, and they do pretty pictures, and they often do multiple things and for their classes, and they're not really thinking about the cost that's involved with that. All we're trying to do is then make them a little more conscious of what's going on with that. So that's just a sampling of it. We're telling people, don't automatically just order the things that you order every single year. look inside of, your desks, look in your closets, look in your storage rooms that are packed full. We were just talking about one school storage room, which has an awful lot of things in it, and find those things in there before you start ordering, because we're in lean times right now. And those are all things that we, work forward. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but if we can save $200,000 and $300,000, then that prevents us from having to go into tax anticipation warrants, and holds us firm until we get our collections in June. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Krizik to talk about the process for the future.
And before I get to the process, Ms. Masterton also put some other procedures in place by reducing the meal allowance for travel. That was reduced. We put some firm timelines in if people are going to be traveling and they're going to be flying. We have a hard and fast rule of 60 days for a request for airfare. Anything that comes in after the 60 days most likely will not be approved, because the concept is airfares are generally a little bit cheaper if you plan yourself out. Airlines like Southwest will give you an adjustment if they make some changes, but they're one of the few airlines that will be flexible enough to do that. So she's looked at some of those kinds of things. I also think the timelines that we have for people expending their dollars will be a little bit more stringent on those this year. In all reality, if budget allocations are given based on what is perceived to be need, if they're not spent by the middle of March, then there is very little educational impact on those expenditures going forward. So the concept of trying to move away from we better spend every dollar that we have in our account, we do not budget based on what you spent last year is what you get next year, so we got to shift that way of thinking. So if there is any opportunity to, if something was projected to be ordered, but they found another way of finding a different solution, we would look for that too. And I think we've always been good about having those conversations at the leadership table with principals and with the cabinet members. So we'll take a serious look at those too. So even though she hasn't identified all of those, we are continuing to talk about ways of optimizing some things. It's possible with the implementation of the ASOP system, which is going to be our employee management system for attendance and substitutes, that we might be able to have a better handle on what our absences and substitutes are, which is going to give some real-time information to building principals, which in the event that we have, any perceived abuses of the use of sick or personal time, there is an opportunity for some candid conversations around that, hopefully to mitigate our substitute expenses. So while we can't put a firm number around those, I really do think we're beginning to be able to be a much more accountable for people's time and look to make some wiser decisions with regard to that. One of the things, shifting now, one of the things that we heard last year is who's making the decisions on the reductions? What did that look like? Both Ms. Masterton and Dr. Sullivan had become aware of a process that had been used in both Batavia and in Carpentersville. The acronym is EPRT, the Educational Program Review Technique. Ours will be the EPERT process, adding the Elmhurst Educational Program Review Technique in front of it. That process, we will have an hour-and-a-half presentation for the building principals on Friday at our first EC12 meeting, and it will be a presentation that you will all hear at our August 17th board meeting, where we will lay out what the process looks like, what the timelines look like, including the opportunity for staff to be involved in the process and for community to be involved in the process. And so we think it is a process that is based on the evaluation of program goals and outcomes and objectives, and gives the opportunity for different scenarios to be presented. Of 10 or 15% reduction, what would that look like if the budget or program stayed the same, or if increased by 10 to 15%? We have spent a lot of time on understanding ourselves what this EPERT process is, because it evaluates both educational outcomes and helps to identify what your priorities are. There is a scoring system ultimately at the end that really ranks everything. And so it really, when you know what your budget number is, everything that falls below that number is subject for either non-increase in growth or it's subject to reduction. So it is a process, Mr. Carlquist, that will have better engagement because all staff will have the opportunity to participate on the 30 or 32 committees that we have identified, which are the programs that will be evaluated. It will also help us raise the issue of when programs have the absence of any data to measure their outcomes of their goals. It will then create an opportunity for them to identify what that assessment of their program will be looking forward. We understand it's a messy process in the first year, and we say messy, and I'll define messy by is it uncovers a lot of practices that had gone unchecked for years. It forces people to take a very serious look at with clarity, identifying what impact they're having operationally or educationally, and how they're showing proof that they're doing that. So that kind of fits in with kind of moving towards a evidence-based decision-making process that we've been trying to move forward with this for the past year or two. And so we'll lay that out. Fred Fox, from retired individual from Carpentersville, will do the presentation for all of you on August 17th. And he will also do the presentation with our principals. The district leadership team will see that presentation in a webinar form on August 26th. We are putting together a webinar so that all staff in the district can hear exactly what this process is all about. And then that gives support to the building principals to help answer questions as well. So we'll create a webinar that they can see. We'll put it on the staff intranet. We may also post it to the district site. And then we'll also put a Q&A around it as well for people to try to understand it. We've got some very aggressive timelines because we are anticipating bringing to you at the end of January, or the second board meeting in January, whatever that board meeting date is, January 25th, something like that, what the recommended reductions are for the 11-12 school year using this model and this process. And it will be a process that we will then use on an annual basis going forward. It isn't a process that only addresses budgetary things because it helps to review where we need to move educationally. So in some cases, there may be consensus that we do need to invest more money in resources into some programs, and those then will be ranked accordingly. So what we have learned from the process, from speaking with both Batavia and Carpentersville, is that until people see how powerful this is, there isn't necessarily a real need to participate. So the first year, they have seen limited levels of participation at the staff level, but in the second year, they want to be at the table evaluating their programs, providing that data and evidence, and putting those reports together because they see that it has real value. So that's our process. We're excited about it. We're the third district in Illinois that we know of that are putting such a process in place. It is reflective of our values of involvement and engagement. It's reflective of our value of having a concrete, well-understood process. And so we think that, this is just an opportunity for potentially us to do presentations in the future to other districts about ways that they can to do that. So kind of to showcase Elmhurst in a positive light in terms of using systems and structures to make some substantive changes, not just fiscally, but educationally. So we're excited. One of Malia's 100 jobs coming on is to help us get organized with doing our first webinar. We've not used that as a communication vehicle before. And so we're looking to have that done. So.
And just to add to that, one of the things that we haven't talked about is the stakeholder involvement in the process, because not only is it administrators and board, but also and staff as well, but it's also there'll be a community parental involvement opportunity for that as well. And so we want to hear what our parents and what our community feel is important. We want them to understand the decision-making process that we're putting in place, and we want to make recommendations to the board that are thoughtful and agreed upon by all the stakeholders, voted upon, and then it's up to the board to decide what they want to do from there. So we're trying to make your job a little bit easier, we hope, And in some ways, we're no longer working in a vacuum, but definitely working in a situation where we have a really good understanding of what these programs cost and what these programs do. And those are the two things that's really important.
One follow-up, and perhaps this is something that might best be deferred until we have the 17th, the presentation on the 17th, a little bit more about the process. But it seems to me, and what you described makes perfect sense. I think it sounds exceptional. It's a degree of, of portfolio management and prioritization and focus on the programs and the like. But where in that process is, back to what I said at the beginning, we fit a budget into an envelope, but this is an envelope that's shrinking. The process that we went through in this past year, in large part, started with the board finally giving the administration some guidance in terms of what the constraints were from a financial standpoint. Where in that process, if in fact January of 2011 is the expected timeout to be able to report back the prioritization and so forth, where in that process does this board need to firm up or at least formulate its preliminary position on what those parameters, the size of the envelope would be?
That's a great question, because simultaneous in January, Pat will be looking ahead again to what our potential revenues might be for 2011-12. And what we think our revenues are should match our expenses. And she would then be coming to you and saying, here's what we think our capacity is. So let's just say it's, 70 million to make a number. That means when we total up all the cost of these programs, we get to the point of 70 million. Anything that falls below that 70 million, that gets us to 72, that costs 72, 74, are either slated for reduction or elimination, because the other piece to this is even above the $70 million line, there might be program expansion because we still have strategic goals to manage. And so that's where there's a little bit of negotiation that happens on that. But we will be coming in with a recommended number that we think is the safe number based on what we anticipate our revenue to be. Now, should there be additional revenue that comes forth later on, then anything that falls right below that line is the first thing to come back. So it's logical. It makes sense. You're not rehashing it all over and over again. So you kind of have to hear two things simultaneously. You have to agree to what the bar is, and then that becomes that's what we work towards.
And that bar is the nice part about this is within the spreadsheet you have all of these programs and the pluses and the minuses and everything else. Where everyone is voted in reaching that bar will be somehow based on probably what our projections are right now and what we want to do to get to either a balanced budget or at least have enough money so that we don't have to worry about tax anticipation warrants. Now, you as a board may say, no, I think we need to set the bar a little bit higher up and have a little cushion. That therefore you will have the items on there that will be affected by that, and that's how you'll make your decision. Or you may say, you know what, we think there'll be a little bit more revenue. We think we found a way to do things, so we could drop this down and add these two programs back in. That's your decision to make, and along with whether you agree or disagree with those recommendations. So. It's a really interesting process, but I think it's a cleaner process and one where you'll feel better, a better understanding of what it is where your money's going and what's going on with it.
Ms. Hirsch.
I just had a question, Pat. When I'm looking at the long projection numbers, the spreadsheet that shows out years. And I just have a question. I'm looking at the percentage change between, for our expenditures, for our total expenditures, the change, it appears as though for 2011 is 0.63%, so less than 1% increase in our expenditures. Sorry, I'll let you get that. It's behind you, but you probably can't read it. It's very small print.
We have the capacity to increase the screen a little bit? We don't? Okay.
I think it's the second to last page. I'm just questioning, I'd like to better understand our expenditures are looking like they're increasing, less than 1%, and then in FY12, we jump 4.2%, and every other, then the next year is our expenditures are growing only by 1.6, and then 2.5 and 2.3. So can you please help me understand what the jump is? We also, when I'm looking at the out years in terms of revenue, it looks like next, fiscal year 12 is a difficult year for us. But I'd like to better understand how we're projecting our expenditures are going to increase by over 4% when the other out years, the number's lower. The contracts, I'm trying to understand.
That's exactly right, is that what we're projecting within here is a 0.5% increase in the current contract, which would allow for STEP as well. And so and that's in 2012, moving forward to that. Now, what it's going to be, we don't know.
But our other expenditures, so everything besides salary, is also going up 3.36%?
Well, the logic is that at some point or other, you have to look at what's going on and go, we're kind of tapped out on our reductions. We have to continue to have textbook adoptions. We have to continue to replace and hold firm on what we've done so far, to not fall back on our technology, to move forward in that. And that has an automatic increase in terms of it. We've cut supplies, as you know, by about $750,000 last year, and again, we've held firm at the supplies at exactly the level that we had the year before, plus reductions in district office and some other areas in there. But we had one adoption, I can't remember, one adoption this year. The cycle will probably have more than one adoption in the next year and going forward, and so that's all built into these projections. So 3% is probably a little on the low side in future years because of the changes that are going on. And again, we have to look at our technology is going to start. We're probably in the third year of our implementation, moving into the fourth year of our implementation. So all those computers and everything that we did at the beginning of the first year, now we have to re-up again and move forward with that. So we continue to build our network and to continue with that, and that all costs money. You can't do effective instruction with 10-year-old computers. We found that out, and so those are all things that will add into it. Benefits, it's very possible it could continue to be low, but we've had some great years in the last 2 years. We've had some really good years. I don't know how long we're going to be able to hold on that. So we're trying to somewhat do averages. These projections are all based on averages. And as you know, everything can change within a minute. If we looked at our projections from 2 years ago, before the crash, they didn't look anything like this. So as we move forward, we continue to tweak and tweak and tweak everything that goes through there. Now, I did find out that the new PMA projections are going to be much more detailed. They've upped their program. They're going to have a lot more detail, so we can hope that we can hone in a little bit better on what's going to be happening in the future with those.
And that type of information will be available for January?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, my understanding is sometime this week we'll be hearing more about it. And so, like August and September, we'll start implementing it. So.
Mrs. Conroy.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik and Ms. Masterton, for the hours of time and expertise you've put in this to allow us to be proactive in this difficult situation. My question is more around when we're looking at the large picture with the budget. I want to be sure we're not missing any potential new revenue areas. And I know we've discussed a little bit about moving away from SACID, which I know is a completely unrealistic thing to do in this economy. But I'm wondering, maybe from Meg's perspective, if you see any opportunities out there in the special education area of things now that we've passed the referendum for this building. Is it possible, and the transition program is a phenomenal they're in a phenomenal shape. It's a great situation. Everyone's very happy with that. But have we looked beyond that, any other possibilities? I know we have a Partners for Success program that we send our kids out to. Have we considered any possible revenue sources of programs that we could move into this building where we might have some revenue sources?
We haven't really explored any opportunities about actually using this space at this time. That's something that now that the referendum has passed, we could look into it. But using the second floor may be a challenge. It's really not a classroom type space, but we could look into that.
And specifically, I'd be interested to know what it would look like, or if it's even possible to have a program like Partners for Success in our own district.
Partners isn't a special ed program, but we could look into, potentially using it. I don't even know if Partners is going to be available this year because of their own finance issues. That's what we're hearing, is that it might not even be available.
I think what I'm asking is I'd just like to make sure the conversations are going on at the cabinet level of possible new revenue sources. And now that we can use the building for instructional purposes, it is quite a large space over there. I'd like to see us consider options of things that we could potentially, obviously it's not going to solve our budget problems, but every little bit helps.
We can definitely look into it.
Any other board? This is a workshop topic, so I have just a couple questions and comments, and then we'll open it up for anybody in the community that would like to come up and ask a question. And so if you don't mind staying up there for a minute. One is a more specific question. So we've had 3 years of the PEP grants. With the elimination of the funding, are we carrying forward any incremental expenses, or are all the incremental expenses that we applied to use that program? I guess for next year, is it a zero-sum game, or do we have incremental costs that we're going to continue to incur on behalf of the district?
We do have a few, and we've been warning principals all year about preparing for that. Things like the repair costs for some of the equipment that we purchased. The repair costs we were able to handle with the PEP grant the last 3 years. We don't have that money anymore, so when those fitness equipment pieces need maintenance or repairs, we're going to have to come up with those kinds of costs. Some of the technology pieces we've tried to plan ahead, but some of the printer pieces, we have pieces of technology that we didn't have before that we'll now have ongoing costs for. So it isn't a lot, but we've tried very hard to prepare principals with at least some knowledge about, from this going forward, you have to plan for.
I can also speak to one other thing that, we probably haven't talked about a lot, but one of the things that we've done this year that is part of our budget, minimal part of the operation and maintenance budget, but they've done a great job, is we've expanded and relocated the Sandberg Fitness Center, and it has gone into the TV studio. And the TV studio has gone into an area where they had family and consumer science, and they had an extra classroom area in there. So the relocation of that and the fitness center expansion, part of the money from the PEP grant went for the flooring and the equipment for that, which we just couldn't fit and wasn't appropriate for the area that we had at Sandberg. And then our buildings and grounds guys put in the labor for it. So it's going to be really nice, but that was part of the costs in there.
One other, I guess, specific cost question. I'm not sure if it was Mr. Kralquist. Somebody earlier, or maybe Mrs. Droney, talked about enrollment, and you talked about the 5 positions. The two, I guess, major input points for the district are probably kindergarten and also coming into the high school. Do we have any sense at this point of are the high school enrollment numbers at expectations? Is that going to put us over where we need, over these 5 positions, or what are our options there?
We haven't had any requests from the high school for any additional FTE based on enrollment. I think they're trying to work with the FTE that they had been allocated at the beginning of when we were going through the budgetary process. there is potentially even an opportunity for a savings of a point for FTE with some realignment and reorganization. So, we could have maybe captured a point for FTE. So I do believe that they had anticipated what some of their enrollment numbers were going to be in January, and looked at the distribution of those students. I do know that Ms. Masterton had utilized our residency check services to just do a run-through on all incoming freshmen and identify were there any discrepancies or inconsistencies. I think there were a little over 100. And then with Mr. Hartman's help, to ask those families to come in to re-demonstrate residency, to just ensure that those who say they are Elmhurst residents are Elmhurst residents. And I don't know where we are in that process. It's not important to note that today, but it's possible there's going to be at least some percentage, minimally 10% of those students who may, at the end of the day, we may come to find out actually are no longer Elmhurst residents. So that was a proactive attempt to kind of look at the residency piece there. But, other than hearing anything new, about any resurgence or of new staff, new students, we haven't heard anything. Now, on August 5th, we're trying to do a huge public relations campaign on having the full day registration from noon to 7 here at the district office. Not that we've not taken a new family registration all summer, we have. And we have multiple families here every day. But we anticipate this to be kind of a large influx of families coming in to register. We will also have Spanish interpreting services available that day too for our bilingual families. We'll see what that brings, Mrs. Ostajic. That could bring some influx at both the high school level or at the middle school level or even at some of the elementary levels that we may or may not have been anticipating. Our job will be to do also a cross-reference on every new family that moves in. Let's say they move into Mrs. Conroy's house, and she's moving. Well, we look to see, are any children moving out of her house? And then does that, balance off the new children moving in? So not only new families coming in, but if they're going into a household that currently had children, we have to do a cross-reference on that. Because not every family may have notified us of a transfer. So we have to use Power School to do that as well. So I think with the exception of Hawthorne, which now we're fine, and Lincoln is fine, we're stable, we're fine at most places now, and there's enough of a buffer and room everywhere else. It is our 1, 2, and 3 grade levels where we did not increase class size beyond 24, which is where we see that where we have the most bubble, so to speak. Okay.
And then lastly, just a comment before we open it up to public input, but Dr. Krizik and Ms. Masterton, I would like to thank you for, I guess, the amount of the depth of work that's gone into this process. The good news and the bad news for us sitting here is there are no surprises here. You presented a picture for us much earlier in the year. We had the opportunity to go through and make some thoughtful decisions on how to try to impact this budget, when we had the opportunity to make choices. And as a board, we made the decision at that time not to cut any more than we thought we absolutely needed to, and to sort of see this through, understanding that the picture at that time for 2012 was going to look much bleaker. And I mean, what we're seeing here is sort of the scenario playing out, not too much upside, not too much downside, but at least we're having the opportunity to have thoughtful discussions, to do some good planning. I think the EPERT process that you're putting in place that we'll have the opportunity to speak to at the next board meeting, I think is very proactive, and also looking at the magnitude of cuts that we're going to need to consider for next year, also very necessary. So thank you to both of you for that. And with that, I will ask if there's anybody from the community that would like to come up and ask a question about the budget process. Okay, seeing none, again, thank you both for your work on this. And we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which I believe is just board communications. First, the upcoming meeting. So Tuesday, August 17th, we have a Board of Education business meeting here at 7:30 at the District 205 Center. And then following that, on Monday, August 30th, we have a special Board of Education meeting, also here at 7:30. Our next item is board communications, and I guess I would just like to make an additional comment. I know that in our community we had a lot of families that were impacted by the flooding. So again, Dr. Krizik, I appreciate your, first of all, making our facilities available at a very short time, and also thank the building staff for Brian. Seemed like they were a little bit short on space, but we didn't really have visibility to that or control to what the space needs were. We tried to fill what was requested, but also regarding the families that were impacted with severe damage to their house, the flexibility that's being allowed so that they can continue their instruction while they're waiting to get their homes back up to livable status. Are there any other board comments or communications? Ms. Hirsch and then Mrs. Davis.
Dr. Krizik, I believe that the school district also, in some sense, was affected by the flooding. And if you could just give us a recap of what we experienced in our buildings, just real quickly, at a high level, and what our status is as, part of the community that was also affected by a flood. Our buildings are throughout our community. So just a high level.
I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Masterton because she could find the document quicker than I did. Before she does, the good news is we had some schools that were not affected. That is good news. And then those schools that were affected, the damage was not so extensive that it is going to push us back with either the opening of the school or a major significant expenditures. I do believe our maintenance and custodial staff were very responsive and on it right away. So in cases of flooding, an immediate response and reaction helps mitigate further extenuating damage. But I will let her do the high-level overview of what we experienced.
Okay, at Bryan there was absolutely no damage. At Sandburg we had probably a greater amount of damage. Our lower level sump pumps were not able to keep up with the groundwater, so water flowed into the band areas, family and consumer science rooms, and the halls. However, there was no damage, just the cleanup that went with it. Water did enter into the gym, and a 9-square-foot piece of the floor will need to be replaced. At Churchville, the carpets with foundation in the new basement allowed heavy seepage again. The carpets had to be extracted and cleaned. Some tile in the cafeteria will need to be replaced. There's rising water in the elevator pit because the sump pumps failed in the elevator pit. At York, there was no damage, or no significant damage. At Conrad Fisher, there was no damage. At Edison, there was no damage. At Emerson, water sheeting off the parking lot entered door 7 and flowed into rooms 118 and 116 in the hallway. All areas have been cleaned. At Field, water entered 3 classrooms on the 2nd floor facing east. 2 rooms on the ground floor had seepage. They've all been cleaned. Everything's fine with that. Hawthorne, the basement sump pumps and drains were not able to keep up with the rain in the original building. Water backed into the PTA storage area and needed to be removed. It appears that 1 box of items, PTA items, was damaged. Jackson had no damage. Jefferson did have water sheeting off the playground, entered through door 7. Floor drains and plumbing fixtures also overflowed. 4 classrooms, the teacher's lounge, and the hallway required extensive cleaning. Carpeting in the teacher's lounge was saturated, but it was already scheduled for removal, so that was a good thing. Some recently donated cabinets were damaged by the water, and the basement had significant groundwater seepage, which has been removed, and the area has been dried, cut, and tried out and cleaned. At Lincoln, there was no damage. There was minor leakage in the gym from an exhaust fan at Madison, and the board office had a couple of ceiling tiles that had to be replaced from leakages behind the flashing. And that's it. The good news is that our insurance considers this one incident as one incident, and so we have one deductible for all of the damage for all of the schools. So the deductible is $2,500, so we will be reporting all our labor and all our materials damage, and we should get some money back on that.
I just want to extend thanks to our custodial staff, who I'm imagining a number of them actually live in Elmhurst as well, and it was a rough weekend, so thanks to them for their quick action and getting on top of it so that we didn't face one of those contingency fees that we needed to incur. So thank you for that.
The board is going to return, assuming we have a motion, to closed session to continue our conversation on employment of employee. There will be no actions coming out of closed session this evening. May I have a motion?
I move that we return to closed session for the employment of employee.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Yes. Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostichek?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Kalquist?
Yes.
7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. So thank you to all of those who are attending live or via TV, and we'll see you on the 17th.